The checkered floor of Rosselli's diner glowed under neon light that buzzed like dying insects. 3 in the morning. No customers. Just stale coffee smell and the hum of a broken refrigerator case. Cassandra Cole's fingers trembled as she arranged dented cans on the back shelf, counting her wages in her head. $37 for 12 hours. Plus the $2 that lived in her coat pocket. That was everything. She didn't know that across the city, a man named Nicholas Russo was sitting in a hospital waiting room, learning his son had 7 days. 7 days for a heart that did not work right. A valve that twisted the wrong way. $150,000 for surgery that might save Oliver's life, or might not. The surgeon's voice had been steady. The numbers had not. Nicholas Russo sat like a monument made of expensive things. 6'1", shoulders broad as a doorframe, dark hair silvered at the temples, a cashmere coat draped over the chair beside him that cost more than Cassandra Cole had earned in 5 years. His face carried a scar from his left eye to his cheekbone, and the men who worked for him had learned decades ago never to ask how he got it. They only knew it meant he had survived something that killed other men. Carlo, his most trusted lieutenant, stood against the wall. 30 years of loyalty. 30 years of watching this man command empires and bury bodies without changing his expression. But now Carlo saw something he had never seen. Nicholas Russo's hands were shaking. The surgery is scheduled for next week, the doctor had said. Monday morning at 6. We'll do everything we can. Everything they could. Nicholas Russo had built an empire on the principle that everything was never enough. Money was never enough. Power was never enough. Control was never enough. And now his 7-year-old son needed a miracle, and there was not enough money in the world to guarantee it. Meanwhile, Cassandra counted her $2 again, as if the number might change if she looked hard enough. She had not eaten. Not today. There was an open container of marinara sauce in the diner's walk-in, 3 days old, and she would heat it when her shift ended and drink it like soup because the calories were calories and she had rent due in 4 days. $43 she did not have. Her landlord's face appeared in her mind without permission. Preston Mercer. 58 years old, a thick neck, gold teeth, hands that grabbed. Last month he had come to her door and his smile was not a smile. It was a threat with lips. "You're short again," he had said. She had stood in the doorway of her converted closet apartment and felt the weight of his body like gravity. "I'll have it next week, I promise." "I know you will." His fingers had reached toward her chin. "There's always ways to work these things out." She had closed the door while he was still talking. Now, at 3:13 in the morning, she felt his hands on her again even though he was not there. This was what happened when you own nothing. Even your body became a negotiable asset. Even your refusal felt like arrogance. The diner door chimed. A man entered, and the cold came with him. Late 30s, expensive everything, moved like someone used to commanding rooms without speaking. He ordered coffee and sat in the back booth. Cassandra brought it. His eyes were grey and hollow and they made her want to leave. "Thank you," he said. Just 2 words. She nodded and turned to go. "Your hands," he said. She stopped. "They're shaking." Cassandra looked at her fingers. They were shaking. They had been shaking for months, and she had not really noticed until someone else saw them. "It's cold," she said. The man studied her like he was reading something written in a language he was trying to remember. "What's your name?" "Cassandra." "Cassandra." He said it like an oath. "You should go home. You shouldn't be here. I work here. Then you should work somewhere else." He turned back to his coffee, and she returned to the counter. 10 minutes later he left $40 on the table. For a $2 cup of coffee, he left $40, and she knew without knowing that he had left it because he could see what she could not hide. That she was drowning. She didn't know he was Nicholas Russo. She didn't know he had a son in a hospital bed whose heart was going to stop beating on Monday morning unless someone performed a miracle and called it medicine. She didn't know that in 48 hours, his world would intersect with hers in a way that would shatter the borders between the life she was living and the life she should have been born into. But at 3:22 in the morning, in a diner that smelled like grease and regret, she held $40 in her hand and felt, for the first time in years, like something might have shifted. The city of Chicago waited outside the windows. Cold. Indifferent. Full of men like Preston Mercer and men like Nicholas Russo, and women like Cassandra Cole who disappeared into the spaces between them. The frost on the windows caught the neon light. The streets were empty. Nothing was coming to save her. Nothing had ever come to save her. She was wrong about that part. 2 days before the surgery that would decide everything, Cassandra worked the morning shift at the Harrington mansion. The family she worked for lived in a penthouse that consumed an entire floor. Margaret Harrington, the mother, moved through rooms like she was conducting an orchestra. 3 children. Cassandra had raised them since they were infants. At 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, she had clothed them and fed them and sung them to sleep in rooms bigger than her entire apartment. She slept in a closet. Literally. A walk-in closet that had been converted into a bedroom. No window. No lock. Just a thin mattress and the sounds of the house continuing without her. Oliver, the youngest Harrington child, was playing in the lobby while his mother was at brunch. 7 years old. Strawberry blonde hair. The kind of child who believed everyone was good. He had been coloring on the marble floor with chalk, and when the door opened, something about the afternoon light spooked him. He ran. Just turned and ran, the way children do when they're startled. The lobby floor was marble. Slick as ice. His feet went out from under him the way feet do. Cassandra didn't remember moving. She was in the kitchen, and then she was in the lobby, and Oliver was on the ground and his lips were turning colors that lips should not be. Gray. Then blue. His body was having a seizure, or something like it, and his eyes had stopped moving. She knew CPR because she had raised 3 children and the world was full of disasters. She pushed his chest in a rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. She breathed for him. 1, 2, 3, 4. He wasn't breathing. His heart had stopped or was stopping or was about to stop, and she was the only thing between him and whatever came after. Emergency vehicles arrived. A hospital. A doctor who said, "How long was he down?" and she said, 90 seconds, maybe less, and the doctor said, "You saved his life." Cassandra sat in a waiting room while they ran tests. She didn't know that the tests would reveal Oliver had been living on borrowed time. A valve that was twisted wrong. A heart that could fail at any moment. She didn't know that Margaret Harrington was in the next room making a phone call that would change everything. What changed everything was a name. Oliver had said her name to the paramedic. Cassandra saved me. She did the breathing thing. She saved me. And Margaret Harrington heard it. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. This is only the beginning of what happens next. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us understand who Cassandra Cole really was, and why a man like Nicholas Russo was about to turn his entire empire inside out for a woman he had never truly met. 15 hours earlier, Cassandra Cole sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, counting the money in her wallet. $2. Not 200. Not 2,000. 2. The converted closet she rented was 6 feet by 8 feet, with a single window that looked onto the alley behind the building. Winter had made the glass frost over, and she could not see through it anymore. She could only feel the cold radiating from the pane like it was trying to reach her bones. Her bed was a twin mattress on a metal frame. Her clothes hung on a single rod. Her entire life fit into this space the way a prayer fits into a whisper. She had worked for shifts at Sal's diner this week. 14 hours on her feet, hair tied back so tight it pulled at her temples, apron stained with grease that would not wash out, feet swollen inside shoes with holes in the soles. She had earned $73. Rent was $320. The previous month she had paid $200. This month there was no previous month's money to carry forward. The landlord, Preston Mercer, had already knocked on her door twice. The second time, his knuckles on the wood had sounded like a warning. She needed $147 more before Friday. The photo sat on her nightstand in a cracked plastic frame. Her husband, David, holding their daughter on his chest. Their daughter, Emma, was 6 years old in the photo. Emma was 9 years old now. But Emma was not alive anymore. Emma had stopped being alive on a Tuesday in April, 3 years ago, when her heart did something it should not have done. The doctors had called it sudden cardiac death. The name made it sound like the heart had made a choice. Like her daughter's heart had simply decided to stop beating and there was nothing anyone could have done. David died 6 months later. Not from sadness, though that was certainly part of it. From a car accident on a wet road, when his attention was somewhere else, somewhere with Emma, somewhere with the life that was supposed to be but was not. Cassandra had lived alone for 2 years after that. She had worked, saved nothing, paid off hospital bills that had come in envelopes the color of old bruises. When the money ran out, she had taken the live-in position with the Harringtons. It paid $400 a week, and housing was included, and she could not afford to refuse anything. She could not afford anything. The Harrington house was 8,000 square feet. 3 stories. White columns at the front. A circular driveway with a fountain that ran even in winter. Margaret Harrington was the kind of woman who wore yoga clothes that cost more than Cassandra earned in a month. Her husband, Thomas, worked in finance and was rarely home. Their 3 children were named Braden, Peyton, and Addison. Cassandra had raised them from infancy, changed their diapers, taught them their letters, braided their hair, walked them to school, held them when they had nightmares. She had done everything a mother does except hold the title of mother. On Wednesday morning, Cassandra rose at 5:30. The alarm on her phone, a phone that was 4 years old and cracked across the screen, buzzed once and she silenced it. The house was still dark. The Harringtons would not wake for hours. She showered in the small bathroom attached to her closet room, the water lukewarm because Margaret had adjusted the thermostat to save money. She dressed in her uniform, black pants, white button-up shirt, black shoes with the holes covered by duct tape. She braided her hair, dark brown with premature gray at the temples, pulling it back so tightly that her eyes watered. By 6:15, she had made the children's lunches, 3 sandwiches on bread 2 days past its sell-by date, 3 apples from the discount bin, 3 small bags of chips. She made oatmeal for Braden's breakfast and set it on the stove to warm. She laid out Peyton's school clothes. She checked Addison's homework folder and saw that she had forgotten her art project, so Cassandra quickly made a construction paper collage from scraps in the recycling bin, gluing pictures of animals she cut from a magazine from 2019. At 7 o'clock, footsteps above her head. Margaret, moving through the house like she owned it, which she did. Cassandra climbed the stairs to the kitchen. Margaret sat at the granite island in a cashmere robe, drinking coffee from a mug that had cost more than Cassandra's weekly grocery budget. Without looking up, Margaret said, "The children need new uniforms. The academy is having a formal inspection Friday." "I will check the measurements," Cassandra said. "The uniform supplier may have a discount if we order." "I do not care about discounts." "Order them today." Overnight shipping. Margaret finally looked at Cassandra, and there was something in her expression like pity mixed with disdain. "You understand that Addison is representing our family. She cannot show up in hand-me-downs." Addison, 7 years old, had worn the same 2 uniforms for 2 years, rotating them. She had never complained. Her 7-year-old hands had stopped expecting things long ago. "Of course," Cassandra said. "I will order them immediately." Margaret took a sip of coffee and returned to her phone. The uniforms would cost $230. Cassandra did not have $230. She had $2. By 8 o'clock, all 3 children were at school. Cassandra cleaned the house, 14 rooms, 8 bathrooms, the kitchen, the dining room, the formal living room that no one ever used. She vacuumed the carpet. She wiped down the marble counters. She folded laundry that had been in the dryer since Monday. Her hands were red at the knuckles from the cleaning solution. Small cracks in her skin leaked when she bent her fingers. At noon, she made lunch for herself, the crust from yesterday's bread, 2 slices of cheese that was on sale, a single apple. She sat in her closet room and ate standing up, looking at the frost on the window. The photo of David and Emma was still on the nightstand. She did not allow herself to look at it while eating. She could not do 2 sad things at once. At 2 o'clock, she picked the children up from school. Braden was 8 and had a chess competition. Peyton was 6 and had soccer practice. Addison was 7 and had violin lessons. Cassandra took them to each event, sitting in the car between activities, doing dishes in her head, calculating the cost of overnight shipping uniforms, wondering how many extra shifts she could work at Sal's before her body gave up entirely. By 7 o'clock, all 3 children were fed, bathed, and in bed. Cassandra read them a story about a princess and a dragon. The book was worn, the pages dog-eared from reading it 100 times. The children had heard it so many times they could recite it. But they still asked her to read it. They still waited for the moment when the dragon, lonely and afraid, was finally understood by someone who saw him. When the story ended, Braden asked, "Miss Cassandra, why do you live in the small room?" "Because that is where I live," she said. "But you could live in a big room," Peyton said. "You could live in our room." "I like my room," she lied. "No, you do not," Addison said. 7 years old. Too smart. You are always sad when you close the door. Cassandra had no answer for this. She kissed the top of each child's head and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. In the hallway, she heard Margaret downstairs, laughing on the phone with someone, talking about a gala that was happening on Saturday. Margaret would wear a dress that cost more than Cassandra had earned in her entire life. By 9 o'clock, Cassandra was in her closet room, sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark. Outside, Chicago winter pressed against the frosted glass. The temperature was dropping. The city was freezing. And inside her chest, in the space where hope used to live, there was only the sound of her own breathing. She pulled out her phone and opened the banking app. Her account showed a balance of $17.42. Rent was due in 3 days. Her next paycheck was 5 days away. The uniform order could not wait. She closed her eyes. Somewhere in this city, in buildings with glass that could be seen through, in rooms that were not closets, people were living lives that included choices. They could order uniforms without counting. They could drink coffee in mugs that cost money. They could close their eyes and not see David's face, not see Emma's small fingers, not see all the ways that love was not enough to save anyone. But Cassandra Cole lived in a converted closet, with $2 in her wallet and $147 she did not have. This was her life. And somewhere in the city, a man named Nicholas Russo was sitting in his office on the 42nd floor of a building he owned, making phone calls that moved money across continents, ordering people to do things they did not want to do, living the exact opposite of Cassandra's life. He had never counted money. He had never felt cold seep through a window. He had never stood in a kitchen watching someone drink coffee and felt the weight of his own invisibility. But in 3 hours, their worlds would collide in a grocery store on the south side, and neither of them would ever be invisible again. Nicholas Russo's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building that bore his name in letters of brushed steel. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago sprawled beneath him like something he owned. He did own it. Not the city itself, but enough of it that the distinction hardly mattered. The desk in front of him was Italian marble, the kind quarried from a specific region of Tuscany, the kind that cost more than most people's houses. Behind the desk sat a man whose presence had made grown men weep. His suit was charcoal, tailored so precisely that each stitch was an act of mathematical precision. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. But in the corner of his office, behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, stood a crib. A crib that had never held a living child. 34 years ago, on a winter night in Naples, his wife had carried their daughter to term. The doctors had said everything was perfect. The heartbeat was strong. The measurements were ideal. The nursery was painted pale yellow because Nicholas had refused every other color. His daughter was going to be happy. She was going to laugh. She was going to call him Papa. But at 37 weeks, the baby came without breath. No heartbeat. No cry. No name, because he refused to name something he had lost before meeting it. His wife had left him a year later. She could not stay in a house with a yellow nursery. Nicholas had stayed. He had lived in that house for a decade. When he finally left, he brought the crib with him. It sat in his office 42 stories above Chicago. It sat there as a reminder that money could not bribe fate. His guns could not threaten death into retreating. His power meant nothing against the randomness of loss. He had built an empire instead. The kind of empire that moved money through channels that left no fingerprints, that gave orders which were followed without question, that transformed weakness into leverage. His closest men were Carlo and Franco, lieutenants who had served him for 15 years without ever seeing him smile. They did not ask about the crib. They did not ask about anything. They simply moved when he moved, spoke when he spoke, and carried out decisions that required no explanation. Tonight, at 9:13 in the evening, Nicholas sat at his marble desk and reviewed photographs of a man named Preston Mercer. Mercer owned property across the South Side. Mercer collected rent from people who had nothing else to collect from. Mercer was the kind of man who understood that desperation made people compliant. Nicholas did not know why he was thinking about this particular landlord. He did not know that in a grocery store 14 blocks south, a woman with $2 in her wallet was buying dented cans of tomato soup because they cost 15 cents less than the undented ones. At that same hour, Cassandra Cole pushed her cart through the fluorescent harshness of the Savemore on South Halstead. The lights hummed above her like something dying slowly. Her hair was pulled back so tightly that it pulled at her temples, a physical reminder of how hard she was holding everything together. She was 29 years old but looked like she had lived several decades beyond that. Her eyes were the color of worn brown leather, the kind that had absorbed more sorrow than eyes should have to carry. The Harrington family's nanny uniform hung on her frame like borrowed skin. She had worn that uniform for 4 years. 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. The 7th day was hers, and she spent it mending clothes, organizing her converted closet, and trying not to think about the life she used to have. She selected 3 dented cans from the discount shelf. She selected a loaf of bread that would be stale by Friday. She selected a single avocado because she had made a promise to herself that she would eat something green once a week, even if the avocado cost $1 and the money was supposed to be reserved for her phone bill. At the register, the young cashier rang everything up without looking at her. Nobody looked at nannies. Nobody saw them. They moved through expensive houses like ghosts, invisible, essential, utterly inconsequential. The total was $8.43. Cassandra opened her wallet. $2 stared back at her. The gap between what she needed and what she had was the precise shape of her entire life. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Can you please remove the avocado?" The cashier sighed. Another calculation was made. The total became $7.15. Cassandra handed over her $2. She had left her debit card at the apartment because checking the balance had become a form of self-harm. The cashier took her cash without pity or judgment, simply as an exchange of insufficient funds and necessary goods. Cassandra made up the difference with her phone, opening an app that showed her account was negative $87 after the purchase. She had overdraft protection, which meant she could sink deeper into debt automatically. It was a gift in its way. She left the store at 9:08 p.m. carrying groceries that would last 4 days if she was careful. The November wind moved through Chicago like something with intention. Her coat was borrowed from Margaret Harrington's closet, a wool thing that hung loose around her shoulders. It had cost $600, which Cassandra knew because the tag had still been attached when Margaret had discarded it. She wore it now, wrapped it around herself, and walked toward home. Home was 14 blocks north. The apartment was a studio above a closed laundromat, the kind of place that rented for $890 a month to people who had nowhere else to go. Preston Mercer was her landlord. He was 56 years old with a kind of face that had been handsome before resentment had settled into the corners of his mouth. He showed up once a month for rent, and each time he showed up, he found new ways to make the transaction intimate. He would lean against her refrigerator. He would stand closer than necessary. He would talk about how difficult it was for a woman alone to survive in the city, how a woman alone might benefit from additional support, how that support could come in forms beyond money. 3 weeks ago, Cassandra had been $240 short on rent. Preston had sat on her bed in the studio apartment, the only place to sit besides the floor, and had told her that he could work something out. He had said it while looking at her body. He had said it while reaching toward her shoulder. She had said no. She had stood up and said no with the kind of clarity that had surprised them both. He had left, but his anger had remained in the room like a physical presence. He had raised her rent by $50 the next month. When she asked why, he said it was a market adjustment. She knew what it really was. It was punishment for refusal. That night, walking home through the frozen Chicago wind, Cassandra did not know that her entire life was about to change. She did not know that a man on the 42nd floor of a building she would never enter was about to learn her name. She did not know that in 17 hours, a child would collapse on a sidewalk, and her hands would know exactly what to do. What she did know was that her phone had 23% battery left. She knew that the milk she was about to buy would sour by Friday. She knew that Margaret Harrington had mentioned needing the car detailed on Sunday, which meant she would have to find time in her schedule that did not exist. She knew that Oliver, the youngest Harrington child, had been running fever when she put him to bed that night, and she had prayed, though she did not believe in prayer anymore, that it was nothing serious. That fever was just a fever and not the beginning of something that would demand more of her than she already had to give. The wind cut through the streets of Chicago with the kind of cold that had substance. Cassandra kept her head down and walked faster. The night stretched ahead of her like all the nights before it, full of small despairs and smaller mercies. She did not know that mercy was about to arrive in the form of a man who understood loss the way only someone who had buried a child could understand it. She did not know that this particular night, this walk home, this moment of being utterly alone with her $2 and her determination, was the last night she would remain invisible. What changed everything was what happened next. The rain came at midnight. Not the gentle kind. The kind that fell like accusations, cold and relentless, turning the Chicago streets into rivers of steel. Cassandra stood in the doorway of the diner on Ashland, her uniform still damp from the dinner rush, her paycheck from 2 weeks ago still undeposited because the bank required a minimum balance she did not have. In her pocket, she carried $2.17. $2.17 to last until Friday, when Margaret Harrington might pay her the wages she was owed, or might not, depending on whether she remembered that Cassandra existed. The diner was closing. The manager, a man named Henry with tobacco stains on his fingers, turned the sign in the window. Closed. The neon lights buzzed and went dark. Cassandra pulled her thin coat tighter and stepped into the rain. Her apartment was 8 blocks away. 8 blocks that she walked every night at this hour, past the boarded storefronts and the men who did not look at her, past the place where she bought dented cans from a man who did not ask questions. Tonight the rain made the streets shine like broken glass. Her shoes, resoled 3 times, leaked at the seams. At the corner of Ashland and Madison, a black SUV pulled up beside her. The window descended. A man inside wore a suit that cost more than her yearly rent. His face was all angles and scar tissue, a white line running from his right eye to his jaw like a geography of violence. He did not smile. Cassandra Cole. She stopped walking. The rain continued its assault, running down her face, soaking through her coat. Get in. I don't know you. No. But I know you. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Quiet voices did not have to shout. They had already won. Your daughter is at Cook County Medical. Room for 12. The surgery is scheduled for Tuesday morning at 7. They need payment by Monday or the procedure is cancelled. The world tilted. Oliver isn't my daughter. Oliver is the Harrington boy. 7 years old. Congenital heart valve defect. The man leaned forward slightly. His eyes were the color of wet slate. The surgery costs $150,000. You do not have it. Margaret Harrington has already informed the hospital that she will not be paying for extended care for household staff's medical emergencies. Her exact words were, "He is not my responsibility." Cassandra's hands began to shake. The rain hammered against her shoulders. How do you know this? Because I know everything that happens in this city. And because 3 hours ago, you performed CPR on Oliver Russo for 5 minutes and 43 seconds on the sidewalk outside the grocery store on Western Avenue. You did not stop. You did not check his wallet. You did not call for an ambulance and then disappear. You kept your hands on his chest and breathed life back into him when he had no legal claim on your kindness. The man opened the door. Get in the car, Cassandra Cole. We need to talk about what happens now. She did not move. If you do not get in this car, I will find you tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night after that until you understand what I am telling you. So please, choose the easier path. Her legs carried her into the SUV before her mind could argue. Inside, the heat was immediate and shocking. The car smelled like leather and something else, something she could not name. 2 other men sat in the front, silent as stones. The man with the scar leaned back against the leather seat. My name is Nicholas Russo. Oliver is my son. You saved his life. I did what anyone would do. No. His voice remained quiet. Anyone would have kept walking. Anyone would have told themselves it was not their problem. Anyone would have waited for someone else to help. He pulled out his phone. On the screen, a video. Her. On her knees on the wet sidewalk. Compressions. Breath. Compressions. Breath. His small body beneath her hands. You did not hesitate. You did not think about what it would cost you. You just decided that this child would live. Cassandra could not watch anymore. She looked away. The surgery is $150,000. I am paying for it. Why? Because my son is alive because of you. And because 8 years ago, my first daughter, Isabella, collapsed on a soccer field. She was 9 years old. The surgery cost $175,000. I paid for it. She lived for 4 more weeks and then her heart failed anyway. She was 9 years old, Cassandra Cole, and she died despite everything I could give her. He placed the phone face down on his lap. Your foster child will not die on my conscience. The surgery will happen. You will not go hungry while it happens. And the man who has been threatening you for the past 6 months will disappear. Cassandra's throat closed. You do not know about Preston Mercer. I know that he owns the building you live in. I know that he has told you he will forgive your rent if you come to his apartment alone at night. I know that you said no, and that last Tuesday he told you that if you did not change your answer, he would have you arrested for theft, claiming you stole jewelry from the Harrington house. I know that Margaret Harrington would testify to this lie because she wants you gone and your apartment available for her daughter's new assistant. Cassandra began to cry. She did not mean to. She had not cried in 4 years, not since the day the hospital called to tell her that Michael was gone, that the aneurysm had already killed him by the time the ambulance arrived, that there was nothing to do but sign the paperwork and decide where to send his body. She had not cried since then because crying cost energy that she needed for survival. But now, in the back of a black SUV, held in the kind of heat that felt like mercy, she could not stop. He will be gone by morning, Nicholas Russo said. Preston Mercer will receive a visit from people who understand that leverage only works when you have more power than the person you are trying to move. He does not have more power than me. By tomorrow night, he will understand the difference between a threat and a promise. Franco, the man in the driver's seat, made a left turn onto Michigan Avenue. Margaret Harrington is a different problem, Nicholas continued. She will not disappear. But she will learn that lies have consequences. She will learn that when you speak cruelty into the world listens and responds. She will learn that there is no charity gala, no social standing, no amount of inherited wealth that can protect you if you have made an enemy of someone with deeper pockets and a longer memory. The car descended into underground parking beneath a building so tall it seemed to scrape the vault of heaven itself. 42 floors, Franco told her. The penthouse was Nicholas's. It overlooked the entire city, a kingdom of light stretching to every horizon. On one wall, a photograph. A small girl with dark curls and her father's eyes, holding a soccer ball. Isabella. Nicholas did not look at it. You will stay here until after the surgery. There is a room. There is food. There is a nurse who will check on you because you have not slept in 36 hours and your blood pressure is dangerous and your hands will not stop shaking. There is also a young man named Carlo downstairs who works for me. He will sit with Oliver during his surgery because you cannot do it alone, and I cannot, and this child needs someone who will hold his hand and tell him that everything will be all right. Cassandra sank into a chair that cost more than everything she had ever owned. Why are you doing this? Nicholas walked to the window. The city glittered below them, indifferent and eternal. Because you are the kind of person who performs CPR on a stranger's child in the rain with no expectation of reward. Because the world has treated you like you are nobody, and I am going to prove to you, and to everyone watching, that you are somebody. Because my daughter is dead and your foster child will live, and that asymmetry is the only thing approaching justice that I will ever find in this life. He turned to face her. Also because watching you stand in that rain, knowing that you have $2 in your pocket and a surgery bill you cannot pay, and choosing to be kind anyway, that is the kind of person worth protecting. That is the kind of person who deserves to know what it feels like to be seen. The rain continued outside, hammering the windows of the penthouse like something trying to break through glass. At 1:07 in the morning, as Cassandra finally slept in a bed with Egyptian cotton sheets she was afraid to touch, Preston Mercer received a phone call. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman he had never met. She informed him that his lease on the building was being terminated immediately. The properties would be seized by federal agents at dawn. The allegations of fraud, extortion, and sexual coercion had been forwarded to the FBI. He had until 6 a.m. to vacate. He did not ask how this was possible. By morning, he was gone. Margaret Harrington disappeared from a charity gala at the Drake Hotel. Security footage would show 3 women in dark coats approaching her as she stood alone in the powder room, checking her reflection in the gold-trimmed mirror. She would be escorted out a service entrance. Her screams would be heard in the hallway, but no one would come to help. No one would trace the car. No one would find her until the FBI did, 3 days later, in a federal detention facility, charged with conspiracy, fraud, and filing false reports to law enforcement. She would spend the next 40 years trying to understand how someone so small, someone she had dismissed as invisible, had orchestrated her complete annihilation. Meanwhile, in room for 12 of Cook County Medical, a 7-year-old boy named Oliver woke from surgery to find Carlo sitting beside his bed, holding his small hand, smiling. "Your father is very proud of you," Carlo said. "He wanted me to tell you that." Oliver asked for Cassandra. She was there within the hour. 1 year later, the Chicago winter had softened into early spring. The ice that had covered the city for 4 months was breaking apart in the rivers, and the sun climbed higher each day, staying longer in the sky. Cassandra Cole stood in the sunlit lobby of Northwestern University, holding a diploma in social work, her name printed in gold lettering across cream-colored paper. She wore a navy dress that fit her properly, that didn't hang loose on her frame the way her old clothes had, and her hands were no longer calloused from scrubbing other people's homes. She had gained weight. Real weight, the kind that comes from eating 3 meals a day without counting dollars. Her eyes held something different now. Not the hollow exhaustion of survival, but the quiet confidence of a woman who had rebuilt herself from ash. The photographs were taken on the steps outside the building. Carlo stood beside her, his massive frame somehow gentle in a charcoal suit. Franco waited with a camera, clicking frame after frame as Cassandra laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from her belly, not the tight social smile of someone performing gratitude. In the background, Nicholas Russo watched from the black SUV, parked where he could see her without being seen. He had not attended the ceremony itself. That was her day, her accomplishment, her name called out in a room full of strangers who would never know where she had come from. But he had been there at sunrise, in the empty auditorium, sitting in the back row, watching her rehearse her walk across the stage. Cassandra had founded a non-profit organization 6 months earlier. The House of Hope, she called it. A residence for women escaping domestic violence and economic bondage, a place where women who had been told they were nobody could learn that they were something. She had written the mission statement on a Tuesday night while sitting in the kitchen of Nicholas's penthouse, a cup of green tea steaming between her hands. He had listened without interrupting, his dark eyes following her face as she spoke about safe housing, job training, legal services, childcare. When she finished, he had taken out his phone and made 3 calls. By the end of the week, the first building had been purchased. By the end of the month, the licenses were filed. By the end of the quarter, the first 14 women had moved in. But Nicholas had not paid for any of it. That was the agreement they had made, unspoken but absolute. Cassandra would not take his money for her work. She had taken a position with the Cook County Department of Social Services, had earned a salary, had opened a business bank account in her own name. Nicholas had donated to her non-profit as a private citizen, his contribution listed anonymously, the kind of gift that appeared in the official records as simply a gift from a Chicago benefactor. The foundation bore her name only. The work was hers only. He would not shadow her again, would not be the invisible guardian. She was no longer invisible. She was standing in sunlight, and he watched from the car. At home, in the penthouse on the 52nd floor, Oliver sat at the kitchen table with his schoolwork spread in front of him. He was 9 years old now, tall and lean, his small frame having grown stronger with each month that passed after his surgery. The congenital heart valve defect had been corrected by the finest pediatric surgeon in the Midwest, a woman Nicholas had recruited from Boston, a woman whose mortgage he had paid off personally after her expertise had saved his son's life. Oliver wore a faded t-shirt with a cartoon astronaut on it, his feet swinging under the table because he still could not quite reach the floor. Cassandra sat beside him, not above him, her eyes level with his as she pointed to the math problem he was struggling with. Fractions. The concept of dividing something into smaller pieces, of understanding that a half could become 4/8, that loss and redistribution were not always permanent. You see, she said, her voice gentle the way it had been with the Harrington children years ago, except now there was no desperation underneath the gentleness. She was choosing to be here. This piece is still the same size. We just gave it a different name. Oliver looked up at her, his eyes serious. Like how you gave me a new name in my heart. Cassandra went very still. The pencil in her hand stopped moving. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away from his face. What do you mean, Oliver? Daddy said that before I had a mother who loved me as a job. Now I have a mother who loves me because I am me. He paused, his small hand reaching across the table to touch her wrist. Are you my mama now? Not just Miss Cassandra who sleeps over. She did not answer with words. She leaned forward and pulled him against her, and she wept into his hair, not the quiet tears of resignation but the breaking open sobs of someone who had finally arrived at the place she did not know she was searching for. Oliver's arms wrapped around her neck, his face pressed against her shoulder, and in that kitchen on the 52nd floor, surrounded by the lights of Chicago stretching out in all directions, a family was sealed into existence by something deeper than law or paperwork. It was sealed by choice. By the deliberate decision to love. 3 hours later, the sun had moved lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Cassandra stood on the balcony of the penthouse, her diploma propped against the railing, the gold lettering catching the last rays of light. She wore a cream-colored sweater, soft cashmere, the kind of fabric that Nicholas had draped over her shoulders 1,000 times when she was cold, each time offering gentleness disguised as practicality. His footsteps approached from inside. She heard them before she saw him. He had taught himself to walk quietly, a habit from a lifetime of approaching dangerous situations, but she had learned to recognize the specific cadence of his stride, the slight weight shift in his left leg that came from an old injury he had never explained. He stood beside her without touching her, the two of them looking out at the city as it prepared for night. The last golden light was fading from the tops of the tallest buildings. "Franco told me about the ceremony," he said. His voice was steady, controlled, the same voice that gave orders to men who would follow him into fire. "He said you wore a smile the entire time you were walking across that stage." "I thought about the girl who was counting coins to buy dented cans," Cassandra said softly. "I thought about how far she had come. I thought about the fact that she was not in some landlord's apartment trading her body for shelter. She was standing in a room full of people who believed in her. And I could not help but smile. I love you." The words were not a question or a request or a negotiation. They were a statement of fact, the way someone might say that the sun was setting or that the city lights were beginning to glow. Nicholas Russo, a man who had spent 43 years building a kingdom of fear, a man who had silenced his grief for so long that he had stopped believing in softness, was telling a woman that he loved her the way other men might announce the time. Cassandra turned to face him fully. He was taller than her by more than a foot, his frame broad and solid, his face lined with the kinds of decisions that could not be unmade. His dark eyes held hers without wavering. There was a scar running from his right temple down to his jaw, a mark from something violent that had happened before she knew him. She reached up and touched it with her fingertips, tracing the line as if she could erase it, as if her touch could rewrite his history. "I have loved you since the night you read Oliver a bedtime story," she said. "I remember standing in the doorway watching you do the voices for all the characters. Your son was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. And I thought, this man has a heart. Everyone is terrified of you, but underneath all of that, you have a heart that still knows how to love a child. That was the night I fell in love with who you actually are, not who the world believes you to be." Nicholas reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. The kind of box that had been inside designer stores and jewelry shops, boxes that held things that changed the trajectory of lives. He did not drop to one knee immediately. He stood there, holding the box, his breathing deliberate and controlled, as if this moment required the same careful precision as any other negotiation, any other moment of ultimate consequence. "I never believed I would feel this way again," he said. "After our first son was stillborn, I thought the capacity for this kind of hope had died with him. I stopped looking for softness. I stopped believing that joy was a thing that existed in the world. And then you saved his life. You performed CPR on a stranger's child because you saw someone who needed help, and you did not calculate the cost. You did not ask what you might gain. You simply acted." He opened the box. The diamond caught the last rays of the setting sun and threw light across her face. "Will you marry me? Will you be the mother that Oliver needs? Will you let me love you openly, in front of everyone, so that the whole city knows that you are no longer invisible?" And then he lowered himself down onto one knee. The wind off Lake Michigan carried the smell of early spring, the scent of ice melting, of water returning to liquid, of the earth preparing to grow again. Cassandra's hand was shaking as she reached out and took the box from his hands. She did not look at the ring. She was looking at his face, at this man who had orchestrated the disappearance of her tormentors, who had built her a safe place to heal, who had taught his son that love was patient and protection was not the same as control. "Yes," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the balcony with the clarity of absolute certainty. "Yes to all of it. Yes to being Oliver's mother. Yes to letting the world see us. Yes to building a life with you." He rose to his feet and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if he had always known the exact size of her hand. When he pulled her against him, she felt the beating of his heart, steady and strong, the heart of a man who had walked through darkness and emerged into light because one invisible woman had chosen to save his child. Inside the penthouse, Oliver pressed his face against the glass door, watching them embrace. He had known. Somehow, he had known that this was coming, the way children always know the truth underneath adult conversation and careful timing. He picked up his phone and called Carlo. She said yes, he announced. She's going to be my mama for real now. Carlo's laugh came through the line, warm and genuine. In 15 years of working for Nicholas Russo, he had never heard his boss smile the way he had learned to smile since Cassandra Cole had walked into their lives. A smile that reached his eyes. A smile that suggested the possibility of redemption. Preston Mercer would spend the next 40 years in federal prison. Sexual coercion charges, extortion, conspiracy. His name appeared in legal documents and court records, a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of Cook County Courthouse. No one hired him. No one visited him. The man who had used housing as a weapon, who had weaponized a woman's desperation, had discovered that desperation works in both directions. He was utterly alone. Margaret Harrington spent her years in a different kind of prison. House arrest, community service, public humiliation that no amount of money or social standing could erase. The video of her firing Cassandra, of her spreading rumors that destroyed her livelihood, had been shared 12 million times online. Her photograph became synonymous with cruelty. Restaurants refused to serve her. Charities removed her name from their boards. She had become invisible in the way she had made others invisible, and the irony was not lost on anyone who knew her name. But Cassandra did not spend her time thinking about them. They had been absorbed into the machinery of consequence, and she had moved beyond anger into something deeper, the work of healing others the way she had healed herself. The wedding took place in June, in the garden of a private estate on the North Shore, where roses bloomed in shades of cream and blush, where the same lieutenant who had held Oliver's hand during surgery now stood as best man, tears streaming down his weathered face as he watched his boss pledge his life to the woman who had given his son a future. Cassandra wore a dress of ivory silk, simple and elegant, her dark hair braided with flowers. Oliver walked beside her, not quite a flower girl, not quite a ring bearer, but simply a son claiming his place in the light. Nicholas looked at her as she approached, and in that moment, standing under an arch of white roses with the weight of his past behind him and the possibility of redemption in front of him, he was not a mafia boss. He was simply a man who had been given a second chance at the thing he thought he had lost forever. This story teaches us that sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. Not just the life of the person being saved, but the life of the person doing the saving. Cassandra did not help Oliver that day in the grocery store parking lot because she was calculating what she might gain. She helped because she was human, and humans have the capacity to see suffering and respond with compassion. And Nicholas did not open his heart to Cassandra because she was beautiful or useful. He opened his heart because she showed him that the part of himself he thought had died in the hospital room where his first son was born, the part that could love, that could trust, that could hope, was still beating underneath all the armor he had built. How did this story make you feel? What would you have done if you were standing in Cassandra's shoes that day, seeing a child in danger? Have you ever known someone who was invisible, someone whose pain was overlooked because the world had decided they did not matter? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation that helps us continue creating meaningful stories like this one. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel. Like this video and share it with the people you love. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and genuine happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes, when you least expect it, the person who saves you becomes the person who loves you. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video. Goodbye.